My name is Luis, and I'm an artist specializing in functional art like coasters, trays, lazy susans, and clocks. I sell some of my art at shows, and as such, I routinely transport things in my car. Most of the time the drives are pleasant, and I usually put on the radio or listen to stories. However, a few weeks ago, I had one of the most unsettling experiences of my life. It was late afternoon when I set out for a local art fair, my car packed with my latest creations. The sun was setting, casting long shadows on the road, and the air had that crisp feel of autumn. I chose a route through some back roads, hoping to enjoy the scenery and avoid the usual highway traffic. The road was winding, surrounded by dense woods, with no other cars in sight for miles. I had just started listening to an audiobook when I noticed something odd in my rearview mirror. A rusty old pickup truck had been behind me for what seemed like too long on this lonely stretch. It was keeping an exact distance, as if tailing me. I turned off the audiobook to focus, the silence in the car suddenly overwhelming. At first I tried to shake off the paranoia, convincing myself it was just another person enjoying the scenic route. But then, the truck's headlights flickered on, despite the lingering daylight, and began to close the gap between us. My heart raced as I instinctively sped up, but so did the truck. My mind raced through scenarios. Had I cut someone off without noticing? Was it just a coincidence? Then I decided to take a random turn onto an even smaller road, hoping to lose whoever was behind me. But to my horror, the truck followed without hesitation. Now there was no doubt left in my mind. I was being pursued. The road ahead was narrow, barely wide enough for one vehicle, with thick trees on either side blocking any escape or view. This is where panic set in. I fumbled for my phone, but there was no signal here. I was alone with no one to call. The truck was now so close I could hear its engine over my own. And in a moment of desperation, I slammed on my brakes, hoping to either force the truck to stop or give me a chance to escape. The truck screeched to a halt just inches from my rear bumper. I saw the silhouette of a man in the driver's seat, his face obscured by shadow. He didn't move and didn't get out. Instead, he just sat there, the engine idling menacingly. My breath was shallow, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. In that terrifying silence, I made a decision. I reversed quickly, swerved around him, and gunned my engine down the road back the way I came. I didn't dare look back, driving as fast as I dared on the winding path until I hit the main road again. Once I was back, I called the police, my voice shaky and urgent. They promised to patrol the area, but the ordeal left me shaken. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, or of that close encounter with unknown intent. To this day, I still avoid those back roads, especially at dusk. The incident left a mark on me, a reminder of how quickly a routine drive can turn into a nightmare. Now, I always ensure my phone has a signal, and I keep an emergency kit in my car. I also never ignore that gut feeling that something isn't right. That day taught me that sometimes, the most ordinary settings can harbor the most unsettling experiences. Back in college, I agreed to pick up one of my friends at the airport. Actually, he wasn't really a friend, more like an acquaintance I just met once or twice. He and I were in some of the same classes, and though I don't recall all the circumstances, he had to visit family for some reason and needed a ride back from the airport. So there I was, a little after 11, sitting in my car in the little pickup lot. The airport was eerily quiet at this hour, the usual bustle replaced by a hollow silence that seemed to amplify every small sound. I had texted the guy, whose name was Mark, that I was waiting, but there was no reply. I kept watching the exit where passengers would emerge, my eyes scanning for him in the sparse crowd. After about 20 minutes, my phone finally buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. Change of plans. Meet me at the gas station on Route 41. No explanation, just that directive. I hesitated, but decided to go along with it, thinking maybe he got a different ride or something had come up somehow. I drove to the gas station, which was a few miles away, situated on a dark, lonely stretch of road. When I pulled in, the place was deserted except for one vehicle at the pump, an old, battered sedan with its lights off. I texted back asking if he was here, but I got no response. Curious and a bit nervous, I stepped out of my car to look around. That's when I noticed something odd. The sedan's driver door was ajar, but there was no one inside or in sight. The chill of the night air was nothing compared to the cold fear creeping up my spine. I called out, "Mark!" My voice echoed slightly, swallowed by the darkness. There was no answer. Just as I was about to get back in my car and leave, I heard a soft thud from behind the station. Against my better judgment, I walked over to check it out. There, behind the gas station, I found him. Mark was slumped against the wall, his breathing shallow, his clothes stained with what looked like oil or grease. He looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes, whispering, "They followed me." Before I could ask who, a car's engine roared to life from the shadows of the parking lot, its headlights blinding me. I instinctively grabbed Mark, pulling him towards my car. We barely made it inside when the other vehicle started to chase us. My heart pounded as I floored the accelerator, the car fishtailing onto the road. Mark was incoherent, muttering about being followed since the airport, about men in a car who had cornered him at the gas station. His fear was palpable and contagious. We drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, taking random turns to lose our pursuers. Eventually we saw no sign of the car behind us, but the fear of it reappearing was constant. I dropped Mark off at a police station, where he reported the incident, though they had little to go on without license plates or clear descriptions. That night changed my perception of mundane tasks like picking someone up. Now I'm always on guard, questioning the shadows and the silence, especially when the night is as dark as that one was. The fear of being followed by an unseen, unknown threat lingers, a stark reminder of how quickly safety can turn into terror. When I was little, I'd go on road trips with my parents. I have a vivid memory of this one particular trip. I think we were going to Walt Disney World, and I was sitting in the back seat playing my Game Gear. It was the late afternoon, and after trying and failing to beat the Lion King game, I put in what I think was Sonic Chaos and started playing it. The hum of the car and the repetitive sound effects from the game lulled me into a kind of trance. But then, something interrupted my focus. A loud, abrupt honk from another car, followed by my dad swearing under his breath. I looked up from my game to see that we were on a long winding road through thick woods, the kind where you don't see another car for miles. Well, until now. An old beat-up truck had appeared behind us, its driver laying on the horn. My dad tried to speed up, thinking maybe the truck needed to pass, but the truck matched our pace, staying uncomfortably close. The road was too narrow for passing, and my dad's attempts to signal the truck to back off were ignored. I could see my dad's knuckles whitening on the steering wheel, his jaw set in concentration. My mom, usually calm and collected, was looking back, her face a mask of concern. "What does he want?" she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. Then suddenly, the truck swerved, trying to overtake us on a blind curve. My dad hit the brakes instinctively, but the truck didn't. Instead, it cut sharply in front of us, forcing my dad to swerve to avoid a collision. We veered off the road, the car bouncing violently on the uneven ground before coming to a jarring halt. The truck stopped too, just ahead of us. My heart was racing, my hands gripping the Game Gear so tightly it hurt. The driver of the truck got out, a large, shadowy figure in the fading light. He walked towards our car with a chilling purpose, his boots crunching on the gravel. My parents told me to stay in the car, locking the doors as they stepped out to confront him. I could hear muffled, angry voices, but I was too scared to look up, my eyes fixed on the game screen, now paused, where Sonic was stuck mid-jump. The confrontation didn't actually last that long. There was a shout and a scuffle, and then silence. I dared to peek over the seat just as my parents returned, their faces pale and their eyes wide with fear. They didn't speak about what happened, not then, not for a long time afterwards. We got back on the road, but the atmosphere in the car had changed. My parents were tense, their laughter gone, replaced by a watchful silence. I didn't play my Game Gear again for the rest of the trip. Instead, I watched the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that truck again. Years later, I learned from my parents that the driver had mistaken our car for someone else's, someone who had wronged him. I never got the full backstory, but apparently he had been looking for revenge but just simply got the wrong vehicle. The encounter left us all shaken nonetheless, a stark reminder that even the most innocent of journeys can turn into a frightening nightmare at the hands of human error or malice. Now, whenever I'm on a road trip, I can't help but check the mirrors more than I used to, the memory of that afternoon still vivid in my mind. Back in high school, I went on a date with this one girl named Lisa. It had taken me a while to work up the courage to ask her out, and luckily the date went decently well. It ended up where we were alone in my car near the end of the night, but here's where things took an unexpected and dark turn. We had decided to drive up to Lookout Point, a spot known for its panoramic views of the city below. The night was clear and the stars were bright. There was a sense of privacy that made the moment feel special. We talked and laughed, and as the night grew deeper, the conversation turned more personal. Then Lisa, who had been charming and engaging throughout the evening, suddenly seemed to shift. Her eyes, which had sparkled with life, now took on a different quality. They were piercing and almost predatory. She started asking questions about my habits and routines, including if I lived alone, which was already a strange question given that we were in high school. She also asked them with an intensity that felt more like an interrogation than casual interest. I began to feel uneasy, but tried my best to lighten the mood. Despite that, she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You know, I like to know everything about my dates. It makes things easier." Her hand was on my thigh, but instead of feeling romantic, it felt like a trap. The air in the car grew thick with tension. I suggested we head back, but Lisa insisted on staying a bit longer. She then began to talk about a previous boyfriend, her voice taking on a chilling, almost gleeful tone as she described how she had followed him. She said how she learned his every move, until one day he just disappeared. Then she laughed, which was rather disconcerting. Her laughter was hollow and her eyes never left mine, as if gauging my reaction for fear or submission. I was now legitimately scared. I tried to start the car, but my hands were shaking so much that I fumbled with the keys. Then Lisa's hand gripped my wrist, stopping me. "Don't rush, we have all night." She said this, and her voice was dripping with something, but it wasn't affection. In a moment of panic, I managed to yank my hand away and start the engine. Lisa's expression didn't actually change. It was almost as if she was expecting this reaction and enjoying it. She sat back, watching me with those unnerving eyes as I drove back towards town, my mind racing for an escape plan. When we finally reached her house, she leaned in for what I thought might be a goodbye kiss, but instead she whispered, "I'll see you soon." Her breath was icy against my cheek, and then she got out of my car with an eerie calm, leaving me alone in the dark with my heart pounding. In the days that followed, I kept expecting to see her and to feel her watching me. I even changed my routines, avoiding places I knew she might frequent. I actually never saw Lisa again after that night, but the memory of her, and of that chilling shift from charming to terrifying, has stayed with me ever since. It was a stark reminder that sometimes, the scariest encounters are with those who hide their true nature behind a mask of normalcy. I work a typical 9-to-5 job, and as I live in a large city, routinely get stuck in traffic. A lot of questionable things have taken place outside my car windows, but only a handful were downright scary. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I found myself in bumper-to-bumper traffic on one of those endless city highways. The sun had already set, casting the road in a gloomy twilight, and the only light came from the flickering street lamps and the red brake lights ahead. I was idly checking my phone when a commotion to my left caught my eye. A disheveled man, who appeared to be homeless, was darting between cars, his movements erratic and his eyes wild. People honked, trying to shoo him away, but he seemed oblivious to the noise and the danger. He was shouting, but his words were incoherent, lost in the cacophony of city sounds. As I watched, he suddenly locked eyes with me through my passenger window. His gaze was intense and almost desperate. For a moment I thought he might be asking for help, but then he did something that chilled me to the bone. He held up a sign, crudely written in what looked like blood. "Run." My heartbeat quickened. Was this some twisted prank? The man continued to weave through traffic, now with a more urgent pace, as if he was trying to warn everyone. Cars were moving so slowly that he could keep up, but no one else seemed to pay him much mind, too caught up in their own worlds or dismissing him as just another urban spectacle. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A black van, unremarkable except for its tinted windows, was inching its way through traffic, coming from behind. It wasn't the van itself that was terrifying, but how it seemed to be following the man's path, methodically, like a predator stalking prey. The man, now directly beside my car again, pounded on my window with his sign, his face a mask of panic. "Run, they're coming," he yelled, his voice now clear above the din. I had no idea what to do. The traffic was at a standstill, and running wasn't an option. But the fear in the man's eyes, combined with the ominous presence of the van, made me feel like I was part of something much more sinister than just city traffic. Suddenly the van made a move, speeding up just enough to block the man's path forward. 2 men in dark clothes jumped out from the van, grabbing him with practiced efficiency. The homeless man fought back, but it was futile. They shoved him into the back of the van, and within seconds they were gone, merging back into the slow-moving stream of vehicles as if nothing had happened. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I couldn't shake off the feeling that I had witnessed something deeply wrong, a glimpse into a hidden dark side of the city. I looked around, but no one else seemed to have noticed, or if they did, they were too detached or scared to react. From then on, every time I get stuck in traffic, I can't help but scan the cars around me, wondering what other secrets the city might hold. That night changed how I viewed my commute, transforming it from a mundane routine into a potential encounter with the unknown dangers lurking just outside my car windows. I used to drive for some of those ride-sharing apps for a few years, and while I had my share of bad experiences, only one truly bizarre thing happened. It was a typical Thursday night. The rain was coming down in sheets, making the city almost unrecognizable through my windshield. I accepted a ride request from a guy named John at a bar downtown, a place known for its rough crowd. When I pulled up, I saw him standing under the awning, his silhouette blurred by the rain. He was smoking a cigarette, which I wasn't too happy about, but whatever. He was also tall and wore a long coat, and he had a face that was hard to read, obscured by the shadows. After a few seconds he got into my car, the smell of smoke and alcohol filling the space. He mumbled his destination, an address I didn't recognize, so I entered it into the GPS. After we got started, he was pretty quiet, and it was just the sound of the rain and the occasional slosh of tires through puddles. But after a few minutes he started talking, and his voice was low, almost a whisper. He told me stories, not about himself, but about others, people who had disappeared, never to be seen again. In addition to wondering why he was telling me this, his tales were noticeably dark, filled with details that seemed too specific to be made up. At one point he talked about a man who was last seen getting into a car much like mine, on a night much like this one. As we continued to drive, I noticed we were taking a very convoluted route. The GPS kept recalculating, suggesting we were going in circles. I asked if he was sure about the address, but he just laughed, a sound that was more unsettling than reassuring. And out of nowhere, the man began to describe my life with eerie accuracy. He knew my apartment, my dog's name, and even a personal habit I thought was private. It all felt like an invasion and a violation. My heart began to race, but I kept my eyes on the road, trying my best to stay calm. When we finally arrived at what should have been his destination, it was just an empty lot, nothing but mud and rain. I turned to face him, ready to ask what the hell was going on. The back seat was empty. I was alone in the car, the door still locked from the inside. The smell of smoke and alcohol did linger, but there was no trace of the man. I drove back home in a daze, my mind racing through every detail. Did I just drop off a passenger, or had I imagined the whole thing? I checked my app, and sure enough, there was no record of that ride. No payment, no request history for John at that bar, no nothing. The next day, I even went back to the bar, asking if anyone knew a John fitting his description. The bartender looked at me like I was crazy. No one like that here, he said. Even so, the doubt lingered like the scent of smoke in my car. Had I hallucinated at all due to exhaustion or stress? Or was there something more sinister at play? This is the point where I stopped driving for ride-sharing apps, the uncertainty of that night just haunting me too much. Now, every time I pass by that bar, I can't help but wonder if John was real, or if the city, in its wet, dark embrace, had played tricks on my mind.